At some point in life, everyone reaches a quiet, unsettling realization. The people you expected to stay didn't, the ones you depended on couldn't, and the attachments you thought gave you meaning are now the source of your pain. Buddhism doesn't soften this truth, it confronts it directly. Your suffering is not caused by people leaving. It is caused by your refusal to let go. The moment you understand this, happiness stops being something you chase from others and becomes something you cultivate within yourself. Letting go is not loss. It is clarity, and clarity is freedom. 1. Attachment is the root of suffering. Buddhism starts from a place that many people resist because it feels uncomfortable at first. Suffering is not primarily caused by what happens to you, but by how tightly your mind clings to things that cannot stay the same. This is not meant to blame you, it is meant to free you. When Buddhism says attachment, it does not mean caring, loving, or forming relationships. It means the inner demand that something or someone must remain exactly as you want them to be in order for you to feel okay. Most people misunderstand this. They think their pain comes from betrayal, abandonment, rejection, or loss. But look closer. Two people can experience the same loss, and one collapses while the other grieves, but continues living with clarity. The difference is not the event. The difference is attachment. One mind accepts impermanence. The other fights it. Attachment works quietly. It does not announce itself as a problem. It disguises itself as loyalty, love, hope, or commitment. You tell yourself you are just holding on because you care. But underneath that care is often fear. Fear that without this person, you will feel empty. Fear that without this relationship, your life will lose meaning. Fear that without their presence, you will be alone with yourself. Buddhism teaches that this fear is the real source of suffering. When you cling to how someone used to be, you are not relating to reality anymore. You are relating to memory. You replay conversations, moments, feelings, and identities that no longer exist. The mind insists, this is how it was, so this is how it should still be. Reality disagrees. Reality moves. People evolve. Priorities shift. Emotions change. Circumstances intervene. When the mind refuses to move with reality, friction appears. That friction is suffering. You also cling to how people made you feel. This is one of the strongest forms of attachment. You associate a person with safety, validation, belonging, or purpose. Over time, the mind creates a subtle contract. As long as you are here, I can feel whole. This is where suffering becomes inevitable. No human being can permanently guarantee your emotional state. When they fail to do so, not because they are evil, but because they are human, disappointment arises, then resentment, then grief, then confusion. Another form of attachment is the belief that your peace depends on someone's presence. This belief is so normalized that most people never question it. They assume happiness requires companionship, approval, or constant connection. Buddhism challenges this assumption directly. It says peace that depends on external conditions is fragile by nature. If your happiness requires someone to stay, act, feel, or choose a certain way, then your happiness is always at risk. You are not at peace. You are negotiating with reality. Impermanence is not a theory in Buddhism. It is an observation. Everything changes. Bodies age, feelings fade, relationships transform, even identities dissolve. When you demand permanence from an impermanent world, you create a battle you cannot win. This is why Buddhism says you suffer twice. First, you feel the natural pain of loss or change. That pain is unavoidable. It is part of being human. The second layer of suffering is optional. It comes from resistance, from replaying the past, from asking why endlessly. from wishing reality had made an exception for you. Letting go removes this second layer of suffering. It does not erase grief, but it prevents grief from turning into long-term misery. When you let go, you stop arguing with what is already true. You stop trying to reverse what has already happened. You stop clinging to mental images that no longer match the present moment. Many people fear that letting go means becoming cold, detached, or uncaring. Buddhism teaches the opposite. Letting go is not emotional numbness, it is emotional clarity. You can still care deeply without clinging. You can love without demanding permanence. You can appreciate without possessing. This kind of connection is actually lighter and more peaceful because it does not come with constant fear of loss. The core insight here is simple but difficult to live by. Nothing outside you can provide permanent stability. When you accept this fully, something shifts. You stop asking people to save you from yourself. You stop expecting relationships to fix inner emptiness. You stop treating others as emotional anchors. Instead, you begin developing inner steadiness, awareness, acceptance, presence. This is why Buddhism places so much emphasis on observing the mind. When you watch your thoughts, you begin to see how attachment operates. You notice the urge to hold on, the urge to control outcomes, the urge to replay the past or worry about the future. With awareness, you stop feeding these urges automatically. You don't suppress them. You simply see them for what they are, habits of the mind, not truths. Attachment promises comfort, but delivers anxiety. Letting go feels frightening at first because it removes familiar patterns. But what remains is space, and in that space, peace becomes possible. Not because life stops changing, but because you stop demanding that it shouldn't. This is why Buddhism says attachment is the root of suffering. Not to condemn attachment, but to show you the exit. When you stop demanding permanence from what cannot provide it, happiness stops being something you chase through people and starts becoming something you cultivate within yourself. 2. People were never meant to complete you. One of the deepest attachments people carry, often without realizing it, is the belief that another person is supposed to complete them. This belief is rarely questioned because it is everywhere. Movies glorify it, culture romanticizes it, society reinforces it. From a young age, you are taught that fulfillment arrives through another human being who fills the gaps inside you. Buddhism dismantles this idea completely, not gently, but directly. No one was ever meant to complete you because nothing was missing to begin with. From a Buddhist perspective, the moment you believe someone else is responsible for your happiness, you have already placed yourself in a vulnerable position. You have handed over control of your inner world. Your peace now depends on their mood, their attention, their consistency, their loyalty, and their presence. This is not love, this is dependence. And dependence always leads to suffering because it asks something from another person that they cannot sustainably give. Human beings are unstable by nature, not in a moral sense, but in a human sense. They get tired, they change priorities, they grow in different directions. They struggle with their own fears, insecurities, and confusion. Expecting such a being to carry the weight of your emotional completeness is unrealistic. Buddhism does not see this as a failure of people. It sees it as a misunderstanding of reality. When you look closely, much of emotional pain does not come from losing someone, but from losing the version of yourself you became around them. You were calmer because they reassured you. You felt valuable because they validated you. You felt safe because they were there. When they leave, it feels like something essential was taken away. But what actually happened is that you outsourced parts of your inner stability to them. When they left, those parts collapsed. Buddhism teaches that this sense of incompleteness is a mental construction. It is not a fact. The mind creates stories. I am not enough on my own. I need someone to feel whole. Without them, I am empty. These stories feel real because they are repeated, not because they are true. When you believe them, you cling harder. You tolerate more than you should. You fear loss more than is healthy. You stay attached even when a relationship no longer aligns with truth. This is why relationships built on emotional completion often feel heavy. There is pressure on both sides. One person feels responsible for holding the other together. The other feels anxious about losing the source of their stability. Over time, this dynamic breeds resentment, control, insecurity, and exhaustion. Buddhism would say this suffering is not accidental. It is the natural outcome of misunderstanding the role of others in your life. Letting go of the idea that people complete you is not an act of isolation. It is an act of responsibility. You take responsibility for your own inner state. You stop asking others to regulate your emotions, define your worth, or give you a sense of meaning. This does not make relationships weaker. It makes them honest. You relate to people because you choose to, not because you need them to survive emotionally. When you no longer need people to complete you, something subtle but powerful happens. Fear loosens its grip. You are no longer constantly worried about abandonment because your sense of self is not built on someone else's presence. You are no longer desperate for approval because your worth is not being negotiated externally. You can enjoy connection without clinging to it. Buddhism emphasizes inner wholeness, not as a personality trait, but as a practice. Through awareness, mindfulness, and understanding impermanence, you learn to sit with yourself without needing distraction or validation. At first, this feels uncomfortable. Many people avoid stillness because it exposes inner emptiness they have been trying to fill with relationships, noise, or attention. But Buddhism teaches that this emptiness is not a flaw, it is space, and space allows growth. When you stop trying to be completed by others, you start discovering who you are without mirrors. You notice your thoughts without filtering them through someone else's reactions. You learn to self-soothe instead of seeking constant reassurance. You develop emotional resilience, not by becoming hard, but by becoming grounded. This shift also changes how you experience loss. When someone leaves, it still hurts. Buddhism does not deny that, but the pain no longer destroys you because your foundation remains intact. You grieve the person, not your identity. You miss the connection, not your sense of worth. The suffering becomes lighter because it is not layered with self-abandonment. People were never meant to complete you because completion implies lack. Buddhism teaches that clinging to this idea keeps you trapped in cycles of attachment and disappointment. When you let it go, you return to something more stable than any relationship. Awareness of yourself as you are, whole, changing, and capable of peace without external guarantees. This is why letting go makes you happier, not because people stop mattering, but because they stop carrying a burden they were never meant to hold. 3. Clinging turns love into fear. One of the hardest truths Buddhism asks you to face is this: much of what people call love is actually fear wearing a softer mask. Fear of losing, fear of being replaced, fear of being alone, fear of no longer mattering. When attachment enters a relationship, love slowly stops being free and starts becoming conditional. You are no longer relating to the person as they are. You are relating to the threat of their absence. Clinging changes the emotional tone of everything. When you cling, your mind is no longer present. It is scanning, watching, interpreting. You analyze tone, silence, distance, and behavior, not out of curiosity, but out of fear. You are not asking, who is this person right now? You are asking, are they drifting away? Buddhism teaches that this state of mind is suffering in real time. Nothing bad has happened yet, but peace is already gone. At the beginning of many relationships, there is openness. You enjoy the connection without gripping it. But as attachment grows, enjoyment turns into anxiety. You start needing reassurance. You want consistency, you want promises, you want certainty. None of these are wrong on the surface, but when they come from fear, they poison the connection. Love that demands guarantees is no longer love, it is self-protection. Clinging also creates control, even if it is subtle. You may not see yourself as controlling, but attachment always tries to manage outcomes. You hold back honesty to avoid conflict. You overgive to secure loyalty. You tolerate disrespect to prevent abandonment. Buddhism would say this is not compassion, it is fear-based attachment. And fear-based attachment always leads to imbalance. When you cling, you stop allowing people to be who they are. You need them to stay a certain way so you can feel safe. If they change, grow distant, or evolve differently, you experience it as a threat. This is where resentment begins. You feel hurt not because they changed, but because your sense of stability was built on them staying the same. Buddhism teaches that this expectation is the root mistake. True love, from a Buddhist lens, is non-grasping. It allows movement. It allows change. It allows people to come and go without your inner world collapsing. This does not mean you feel nothing when someone leaves. It means your suffering is not multiplied by fear and resistance. You feel sadness but not panic. You feel loss but not self-erasure. Clinging also turns love into a transaction. You start keeping mental records. Who texts first? Who gives more? Who sacrifices more? This accounting happens because attachment fears imbalance. You want proof that you are still chosen. Buddhism points out that this constant measuring drains joy. You are no longer experiencing love. You are monitoring it. Another subtle effect of clinging is that it makes you shrink. You suppress parts of yourself to maintain attachment. You avoid growth that might disrupt the relationship. You silence needs that might push the other person away. Over time, you become smaller to keep someone close. Buddhism sees this as a form of self-harm. You abandon your own truth to protect attachment. Letting go reverses this entire pattern. When you release clinging, love becomes lighter. You stop needing constant reassurance because your safety no longer depends on someone else's behavior. You can speak honestly without fear of losing yourself. You can allow distance without immediately assuming disaster. Peace returns not because the relationship becomes perfect, but because fear no longer dominates your mind. Buddhism does not tell you to stop loving. It teaches you how to love without suffering. Love without clinging means you appreciate presence without demanding permanence. You care without controlling. You connect without losing yourself. This kind of love is rare because it requires inner stability, not emotional dependency. When clinging dissolves, something surprising happens. Even if a relationship ends, the pain is cleaner. It does not spiral into obsession, self-blame, or endless rumination. You grieve, but you do not chase. You miss, but you do not beg reality to reverse itself. Buddhism teaches that this is freedom, not freedom from connection, but freedom from fear. Clinging turns love into fear because it asks love to protect you from impermanence. Letting go allows love to exist alongside impermanence without trying to defeat it. And when fear leaves the relationship, happiness no longer feels fragile. It becomes steady, quiet, and rooted within you, rather than hostage to someone else's choices. This is why letting go makes you happier. Not because you stop loving deeply, but because you stop loving fearfully. 4. Letting go reveals who you really are. As long as your life is organized around other people, you rarely meet yourself. This is not because relationships are wrong, but because attachment blurs self-perception. Buddhism teaches that clinging to people, roles, and identities creates a false sense of self, one that exists only in relation to others. When those relationships change or end, the confusion you feel is not just loss, it is the sudden disappearance of the identity you are using. Most people don't realize how much of who they think they are is borrowed. You are the reliable one, the needed one, the loved one, the partner, the friend, the emotional support. These roles feel solid because they are constantly reinforced, but they are not the self, they are conditions. Buddhism emphasizes that the self is not fixed. It is a process shaped by causes and conditions. When the conditions change, the roles fall away. What remains is often unfamiliar, and that unfamiliarity is frightening. This is why letting go feels so destabilizing at first. When people leave and you stop chasing them, blaming them, or trying to pull them back, there is a gap. The mind panics in that gap. It asks, "Who am I now?" Without someone to reflect you back to yourself, the mirrors disappear. Buddhism does not rush to fill that space. It invites you to stay with it. Staying with that emptiness is uncomfortable because it exposes how much of your identity was constructed to be seen, needed, or validated. You notice how often your thoughts revolve around how you are perceived. You notice how your sense of worth rises and falls based on attention, approval, or closeness. This awareness can feel harsh, but Buddhism sees it as awakening. You cannot be free from illusion until you see it clearly. Letting go strips away emotional costumes. You are no longer performing to be loved or adjusting yourself to stay connected. Without those constant adjustments, something raw and honest emerges. You begin to see your habits, fears, desires, and patterns without distraction. This is not always pleasant, but it is real, and reality is where peace begins. Buddhism teaches that suffering persists because people cling not only to others, but to identities built around others. When those identities collapse, the mind rushes to rebuild them, often by seeking new attachments immediately, new relationships, new validations, new distractions. But this only delays self-understanding. Letting go fully means resisting that urge to refill the space too quickly. In the quiet that follows letting go, you start to observe your mind instead of running from it. You notice thoughts arising and passing without being defined by them. You begin to understand which emotions belong to you and which were reactions to attachment. This clarity is not dramatic, it is subtle and steady. Buddhism calls this insight, and it grows through observation, not force. As self-awareness deepens, you begin to experience a different kind of confidence. Not the confidence that comes from being chosen or needed, but the confidence that comes from knowing yourself directly. You no longer need constant external confirmation to feel real. You become less reactive, less defensive, and less desperate to hold on to people for identity. This also changes how you approach future relationships. You enter them as a whole person, not as someone seeking definition. You are less likely to lose yourself because you know where your center is. Buddhism sees this as the natural outcome of non-attachment. You relate from presence, not from lack. Letting go reveals who you really are because it removes distractions, not because it gives you something new. It peels away the layers built from dependence and fear. What remains is not a perfect self, but an honest one. A self that can observe, adapt, and remain grounded, even when circumstances shift. This is why Buddhism does not rush healing. It understands that clarity comes from staying with reality as it is. When you stop clinging to people to tell you who you are, you begin the deeper work of discovering yourself directly. And in that discovery, Happiness becomes quieter, steadier, and no longer dependent on who stays or leaves. 5. Impermanence is not cruel, it is liberating. One of the most misunderstood teachings in Buddhism is impermanence. People hear that everything ends, everything changes, and nothing lasts, and they immediately associate this truth with loss, sadness, or pessimism. But Buddhism does not present impermanence as a threat. It presents it as relief. Suffering does not come from the fact that things change. It comes from the refusal to accept that they do. From the Buddhist view, impermanence is simply the nature of reality. Bodies age, emotions shift, relationships evolve. Even your own thoughts are never the same from one moment to the next. The mind, however, resists this flow. It wants stability, certainty, and guarantees. It wants to freeze moments that feel good and erase moments that hurt. When reality refuses to cooperate, frustration arises. That frustration, repeated and intensified, becomes suffering. When people leave your life, the pain you feel is natural. Buddhism never denies natural pain. What it challenges is the additional suffering created by clinging to the past. The mind replays what was. It compares the present to a memory. It asks why things couldn't stay the same. In doing so, it traps you in time. You are no longer living in the present. You are living in resistance. Impermanence, when truly understood, breaks this cycle. When you accept that change is not a mistake but a rule, you stop taking it personally. People leaving is no longer proof that you failed, were unworthy, or did something wrong. It is simply movement. Causes and conditions shift, and outcomes follow. This perspective does not erase grief, but it removes self-blame and bitterness from it. One of the most liberating aspects of impermanence is that it applies to suffering as well. Pain feels endless when you believe it should not exist. But when you understand that pain, like everything else, is temporary, you stop panicking inside it. You stop asking when it will end and start observing it as a passing experience. This observation weakens its hold. You suffer less not because pain disappears immediately, but because you stop adding fear to it. Impermanence also frees you from chasing the past. Many people suffer because they are trying to recreate a version of life that no longer exists. They want people to return to who they were. They want relationships to feel the way they once did. Buddhism teaches that this longing is a form of clinging to illusion. The past cannot be revived. The moment you accept this fully, energy that was trapped in longing becomes available for living. Understanding impermanence changes how you appreciate people. Instead of assuming they will always be there, you begin to value presence while it exists. You listen more carefully. You hold moments more lightly. You stop postponing honesty and connection. Paradoxically, accepting that people may leave makes relationships richer, not poorer. You stop taking them for granted because you know nothing is guaranteed. Impermanence also dissolves entitlement. When you believe things should last forever, you feel wronged when they don't. When you accept impermanence, you feel gratitude instead. You recognize that anything given to you, even temporarily, was never owed. This shift from entitlement to gratitude is a major source of peace. Buddhism teaches that clinging to permanence in an impermanent world is like trying to hold water in your fists. The tighter you squeeze, the faster it slips away. Letting go does not mean losing everything. It means changing how you hold things. You hold them with awareness, not desperation. You allow life to move without trying to trap it. When impermanence is deeply understood, fear weakens. Fear relies on the illusion that something should stay the same. Once that illusion dissolves, fear has less ground to stand on. You stop bracing against change. You stop treating endings as personal failures. You begin to see them as transitions. Impermanence is liberating because it removes false expectations. It frees you from demanding certainty from an uncertain world. It teaches you to meet life as it is, not as you wish it to be. In that meeting, happiness becomes simpler. It is no longer built on guarantees or permanence, but on presence, awareness, and acceptance. This is why letting go makes you happier. Not because you lose less, but because you stop fighting the truth of change. When you align with impermanence instead of resisting it, suffering loosens its grip, and peace becomes possible even in the midst of endings. 6. Happiness comes from non-attachment, not isolation. One of the biggest misconceptions about letting go is the belief that it leads to isolation, emotional coldness, or detachment from life itself. Many people hear the Buddhist teaching of non-attachment and assume it means withdrawing from relationships or becoming indifferent to others. This misunderstanding keeps people trapped in suffering because they think the only alternative to clinging is loneliness. Buddhism teaches something very different. Non-attachment is not about cutting people off. It is about changing how you relate to them internally. Isolation is physical and emotional separation. Non-attachment is psychological freedom. You can be deeply connected to people without being dependent on them. You can care without clinging. You can love without gripping. The suffering most people experience does not come from connection itself, but from the belief that connection must be permanent, consistent, and emotionally stabilizing at all times. When you are attached, relationships feel heavy. You need them to work a certain way. You need people to show up on time, respond correctly, stay emotionally available, and meet expectations you may not even articulate. When they fail, frustration and disappointment arise. Buddhism teaches that this pressure is what drains joy from relationships. You are not enjoying people as they are. You are evaluating them based on how well they protect your inner comfort. Non-attachment removes this burden. When you let go internally, you stop asking relationships to guarantee your happiness. You stop needing people to behave perfectly for you to feel okay. This does not reduce intimacy. It increases it. You can be present without anxiety. You can listen without defensiveness. You can enjoy connection without fearing its end. Many people stay attached because they believe distance equals abandonment. Buddhism challenges this fear directly. Distance does not destroy connection. Clinging does. When you allow people space without panic, relationships breathe. When you allow change without resistance, connection becomes flexible instead of fragile. Non-attachment also changes how you experience being alone. Solitude stops feeling like rejection and starts feeling like neutrality. You are no longer measuring your worth by who is present or absent. Time alone becomes space for awareness, rather than evidence of failure. Buddhism teaches that peace grows when you are comfortable with your own mind. When solitude no longer threatens you, relationships lose their power to destabilize you. This is where true happiness begins to form. Happiness that depends on constant social reinforcement is unstable. It rises and falls with attention, approval, and presence. Non-attached happiness is steadier. It does not require isolation, but it does not fear it either. You can move between connection and solitude without losing yourself. Another key aspect of non-attachment is that it reduces emotional reactivity. When you are not clinging, you are less likely to interpret every change in behavior as a personal threat. Someone's silence does not immediately mean rejection. Someone's distance does not automatically mean loss. You respond instead of react. Buddhism sees this clarity as a major source of inner peace. Non-attachment also allows you to show up more authentically. When you are not afraid of losing people, you are more honest. You express boundaries without guilt. You speak truth without manipulation. You no longer perform to secure love. This authenticity deepens relationships that are aligned and naturally allows misaligned ones to fade without drama. Importantly, Buddhism does not encourage emotional suppression. You still feel sadness, joy, affection, and loss. The difference is that emotions pass through you instead of defining you. You experience them fully without clinging to them or pushing them away. This fluid relationship with emotion prevents suffering from becoming chronic. When happiness comes from non-attachment, you stop seeing people as emotional lifelines and start seeing them as companions. Companions walk alongside you for part of the journey. They are not responsible for carrying you. This perspective removes resentment and unrealistic expectations. You appreciate presence without demanding permanence. Non-attachment also protects you from bitterness. When relationships end, you are less likely to replay the past or assign blame. You understand that change does not require a villain. Pauses and conditions shift, and outcomes follow. This understanding prevents heartbreak from turning into long-term anger or cynicism. The quiet power of non-attachment is that it allows life to flow. You participate fully without gripping outcomes. You care deeply without losing balance. You engage without entanglement. Buddhism teaches that this is the middle path, not withdrawal and not obsession, but awareness. Happiness comes from non-attachment because non-attachment removes the inner struggle. You stop fighting reality. You stop demanding emotional guarantees. You stop needing life to be different in order to be okay. In that acceptance, peace emerges naturally. Letting go does not mean walking away from people. It means walking toward life without chains. And when your happiness is no longer held hostage by who stays or leaves, you experience a freedom that isolation could never give you. 7. Freedom begins the moment you release control. At the deepest level, attachment is not just about people, it is about control. Control over outcomes, control over how others feel, act, stay, or choose you. Buddhism teaches that this need for control is one of the most exhausting illusions the mind creates. You believe that if you hold on tightly enough, explain clearly enough, give enough, or sacrifice enough, you can prevent loss. But control is a false promise. It demands constant effort and never delivers certainty. Most suffering does not come from what happens, but from the mind's insistence that things should have gone differently. You replay conversations. You imagine alternative choices. You ask yourself what you could have done to keep someone. This mental struggle is an attempt to regain control over something that has already moved beyond you. Buddhism sees this as unnecessary suffering layered on top of pain. Releasing control does not mean becoming passive or careless. It means recognizing the limits of your influence. You can act with integrity, you can communicate honestly, you can care deeply, but you cannot decide how others respond, feel, or remain. The moment you accept this fully, a huge amount of tension leaves the body and mind. Control keeps you trapped in vigilance. You are always watching for signs of change, distance, or threat. This constant monitoring creates anxiety even when nothing is wrong. Buddhism teaches that a mind seeking control is never at rest. It is always preparing for loss. Letting go interrupts this cycle. You stop scanning reality for reassurance and start meeting it as it is. When you release control, you also release blame. Much of self-blame comes from the belief that you should have been able to prevent loss. You think, if I had done more, said less, been different, they would have stayed. Buddhism challenges this story. People leave not because you failed to control the situation properly, but because conditions changed. No amount of self-punishment can reverse that. Freedom arises when you stop negotiating with the past. You stop trying to fix what is already over. You stop demanding explanations that will never fully satisfy you. Buddhism teaches that clarity comes not from answers, but from acceptance. Acceptance is not approval. It is acknowledgement of reality without resistance. Letting go of control also restores your energy. When you are no longer trying to manage others' emotions or decisions, your attention returns to what you can influence: your actions, your awareness, your response. This shift creates stability. You stop living reactively and start living deliberately. Another hidden cost of control is that it distorts relationships. When you are attached to outcomes, you subtly manipulate. You overgive to secure loyalty. You withhold truth to avoid conflict. You shape yourself to maintain connection. Buddhism sees this as a loss of authenticity. Releasing control allows you to show up as you are, without strategy or fear. Freedom also changes how you experience endings. When control is released, endings no longer feel like personal defeats. They are transitions. You do not need to understand them fully to accept them. You do not need closure from others to move forward. Buddhism teaches that inner closure comes from clarity, not explanation. This lesson is difficult because the ego resists it. Control gives the illusion of safety. Letting go feels like stepping into uncertainty. But Buddhism points out that uncertainty was always there. Control only distracted you from it. When you stop pretending you can manage life completely, you paradoxically feel lighter and more grounded. Freedom is not found in holding on harder. It is found in loosening the grip. When you release control, you stop fighting reality. When you stop fighting reality, suffering weakens. And when suffering weakens, happiness no longer feels fragile or conditional. Letting go is not giving in to loss. It is giving in to truth. The truth is that you cannot own people, hold on to moments, or guarantee results. The truth is that peace does not come from controlling life, but from flowing with it. This is why Buddhism teaches that freedom begins the moment you let go. Not because life becomes certain, but because you stop insisting that it must be. And in that release, happiness finally becomes something that belongs to you, not to situations, not to people, and not to the false idea of control. Letting go is not a one-time event. It is a daily practice. One of the biggest mistakes people make after hearing about letting go is thinking it happens once, and then you are free forever. Buddhism does not teach letting go as a single choice or a dramatic breakthrough. It teaches it as a discipline, something you return to again and again, often quietly, often imperfectly. The mind does not release attachment all at once, because attachment is not a switch, it is a habit. Even after you understand that clinging creates suffering, the mind will still reach for what feels familiar. It will replay memories, it will imagine different futures, it will feel drawn to people who once brought comfort. This does not mean you failed. Buddhism sees this as normal conditioning. The problem starts only when you identify with these movements of the mind instead of watching them. Letting go in practice begins with awareness. You notice when the mind tightens. You notice when thoughts keep circling around someone who is no longer there. You notice the urge to check, reach out, return, or reopen old wounds. Buddhism does not ask you to crush these urges. Suppression creates resistance, and resistance makes attachment stronger. Instead, you observe without reacting. You let the urge rise and fall on its own. This is where real strength is built. Not in forcing yourself to move on, but in allowing discomfort without feeding it. Each time you don't act on attachment, you loosen its grip a little. Each time you sit with longing without turning it into action, you take back a piece of inner freedom. Over time, this reshapes your mind. The daily practice of letting go also applies to expectations. You may let go of a person, but still cling to how life should feel afterward. You expect peace to come right away, You expect clarity to replace confusion. Buddhism warns against this quiet attachment to outcomes. Healing does not move in a straight line. Some days feel lighter, other days bring back old emotions. Letting go means accepting this uneven process without being hard on yourself. Another part of daily letting go is releasing mental narratives. The mind loves stories. Stories about who hurt you, who left you, who failed you. These stories feel fair, but they keep attachment alive. Buddhism teaches that suffering continues as long as you keep repeating the same identity. Victim, abandoned, unchosen. Letting go means noticing these stories and gently stepping out of them. This does not mean pretending it didn't happen. It means refusing to live inside it. You accept the pain without building a permanent home in it. Each time the mind returns to the same story, you bring it back to the present moment. To breath, to sensation, to what is truly happening now, not what happened then. Letting go as a practice also includes patience with yourself. Many people become strict when they notice attachment returning. They think they should be over it already. Buddhism rejects this harshness. Harshness is another form of clinging, this time to a perfect version of yourself. Compassion is essential. You treat your mind the way you would treat a child learning to walk. You guide gently. You don't punish falling. Over time, something small but powerful changes. The thoughts still come, but they no longer control you. The memories still appear, but they pass quicker. The emotional weight softens. You are no longer pulled into suffering automatically. This is not because you forced detachment, but because you trained awareness. Daily letting go also means releasing comparison. You stop measuring your progress against others. You stop asking why someone else moved on faster. Buddhism teaches that comparison strengthens ego and dissatisfaction. Every mind has its own conditioning. Every path unfolds in its own way. Letting go includes letting go of timelines. Eventually, letting go becomes less about specific people and more about how you relate to experience itself. You stop holding tightly to good moments. You stop fighting difficult ones. You meet life with less demand and more presence. This is where peace becomes stable. The final insight of this lesson is simple but challenging. Letting go is not something you complete. It is something you live. Every day brings chances to cling or release. Every moment invites awareness or habit. Buddhism does not promise perfection. It offers freedom through practice. And that freedom is not dramatic. It is quiet. One day, you notice you are not as reactive. Another day, you realize you can think of someone without pain taking over. Another day, you feel content without needing anything to change. These are signs of true letting go. Happiness grows here, not as excitement, not as constant pleasure, but as steadiness. A calm that does not depend on who stays, who leaves, or who returns. When letting go becomes a daily practice, happiness stops being something you chase and starts being something you naturally return to. This is the deepest freedom Buddhism offers. Not escape from life, but the ability to live fully without being trapped by attachment. 9. When you let go, life finally meets you where you are. One of the quiet truths Buddhism points to is this: as long as you are holding on to people, outcomes, or versions of the past, you are not fully present in your own life. Your body may be here, but your mind is elsewhere. It is replaying, expecting, hoping, regretting. Letting go is not only about releasing people, it is about returning to the present moment where life is actually happening. Most suffering continues because attention is split. Part of you is living now, but another part is still emotionally tied to what should have been or what might return. Buddhism teaches that happiness cannot live in divided attention. Peace comes when the mind stops traveling and settles into what is real. Letting go brings you back to the present. When you stop holding on, you start noticing what was always there, but hidden by attachment. Simple moments feel richer. Silence feels less scary. You are no longer emotionally rushing towards something missing. This does not mean life becomes perfect. It means you stop delaying peace until conditions improve. Letting go also allows life to respond to you honestly. As long as you cling, you unknowingly close yourself off. You are guarded, distracted, or emotionally stuck. You miss chances for connection, growth, and clarity because your energy is tied to what you fear losing. Buddhism teaches that openness begins when attachment ends. When you release, you become available again. This availability changes how you move through the world. You listen more deeply because you are not searching for validation. You act more clearly because you are not trying to protect an emotional investment. You make choices based on alignment instead of fear. Life meets you differently when you meet it without demands. Another part of this lesson is trust. Not blind hope, but trust in the unfolding of causes and conditions. Buddhism does not promise that what comes next will always feel good. It teaches that resistance makes everything heavier. When you let go, you stop forcing meaning or direction. You allow life to show you what is next, instead of insisting on what should have stayed. This does not make you passive, it makes you responsive. You are no longer reacting from old wounds or unmet expectations. You respond from clarity. This clarity brings a quiet confidence. You feel less rushed, less desperate, less mentally noisy. You begin to feel steady in your own presence. Letting go also changes how you experience uncertainty. Uncertainty stops feeling like danger and starts feeling like space. Space for something new. Space for growth. Space for truth. Buddhism teaches that clinging narrows life. Letting go opens it. When you release attachment, you are no longer living in a tunnel of fear and hope. You are living in awareness. Many people fear that if they let go, nothing will replace what they lost. Buddhism meets this fear gently but clearly. Life is not empty. It is only blocked by fixation. When fixation fades, movement returns. New experiences come naturally, not as replacements but as continuations. You don't need to chase them. They arrive because you are present enough to receive them. This lesson also brings humility. You realize how much energy you spent trying to control, protect, or secure what was never guaranteed. When you see this clearly, you stop fighting yourself. You stop draining your mind. You accept your humanity without judgment. Buddhism sees this acceptance as wisdom. As presence deepens, happiness becomes less dramatic but more dependable. It is not tied to excitement or reassurance. It shows up as calm, steadiness, and ease with what is. You are not always waiting for something to change before you allow yourself to feel okay. You are okay now, even while life continues to move. Letting go allows life to meet you where you are because you finally stop getting in the way. You stop blocking the present with the past. You stop filling the moment with expectations. You arrive fully. This is one of the deepest results of letting go. You do not become someone new. You simply return to yourself as you are, here, alive, and capable of peace without conditions. And in that return, happiness is no longer something you search for. It is something you notice was quietly available all along. Letting go of people is not about becoming distant, cold, or detached from life. It is about ending the silent war inside you. Buddhism does not ask you to stop caring. It asks you to stop clinging. The moment you release the belief that your happiness depends on who stays, who chooses you, or who understands you, something deep shifts. You stop chasing stability outside yourself and start building it within. People will still come and go, relationships will still change, loss will still happen. But it will no longer control you. You will feel pain without being crushed by it. You will miss without losing yourself. You will love without fear running the relationship. This is the freedom Buddhism points to again and again. Not freedom from life, but freedom within it. When you let go, you are not giving up. You are waking up. You are choosing reality over illusion, presence over attachment, peace over control. And in that choice, happiness stops being fragile. It becomes steady, quiet, and deeply yours, no longer dependent on anyone showing up, staying, or saving you.